All right, we'd like to call this meeting of the West Dallas-West Milwaukee School District to order, please. If you could please rise for the pledge. And Mr. Keller, would you please lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Keller, and the rest of our team. Suzette, could we do the roll, please?
Yep. Ms. Kloop.
Here.
Mr. Sikich.
Present.
Mr. Keller.
Yep.
Mrs. Justum. I believe she'll be joining soon. Mr. Ustrup.
Here.
Mr. Schultz.
Here.
Mr. Lee.
Here.
Mrs. Kaiser.
Here.
President Emmons.
Here. Proper notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the open meeting laws of the state of Wisconsin. Do we have any modifications or additions, changes to tonight's agenda?
I have nothing.
All right, we will move on to our public budget hearing for the evening. So this is an annual event that we are by law to have at this time of the year. There's a set schedule where budgets have to be reviewed and approved. So tonight is our scheduled budget hearing. So after the budget presentation, we will be able to take questions from the board. And at that point, after that, we'll be able to take questions and comments from participants related to the budget hearing itself. And we'll move on with concluding remarks and then move on to the rest of the meeting. So with that being said, I will turn the 2020-2021 budget presentation over to Caitlin Windler.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Caitlin Windler. I am your Director of Finance and Operations. I just wanted to say thanks and welcome for, thanks for joining and welcome tonight. We are going through the 2021 fiscal year budget. So we'll be looking at the 20,000-foot view of our various funds. We'll be going through the revenue limit, the tax levy, the mill rate, and what those things all mean. So I just wanted to start out with, I'm going to start by sharing my screen. And all right. So we'll start out with the mission. So our district recently adopted an updated strategic plan set with a mission, vision, and our equity non-negotiables that were all approved by our board. So starting with our mission, every day, the West Dallas-West Milwaukee School District focuses on equity through deeper learning, fosters a sense of belonging, and educates the whole child so that every learner achieves success. So I'll just start by, there we go. Recognizing our board members who dedicate a lot of their own time to making sure that this work continues to move forward. So we have President Stephanie Emmons, Vice President Heather Justum, Treasurer Noah Lee, Clerk Gary Schultz, Secretary Brian Keller, and board members Kristen Kaiser, Christine Klug, Jeff Sikich, and Mr. Bill Ustruck. So thank you to our board members who are here with us every Monday night during our board meetings and continuing to push our work forward to support our learners and our educators. And also a shout out to our administrative staff who does the same behind the scenes day in and day out. Our superintendent, Dr. Marty Lexmond, Director of Leadership and Learning, Deidre Raymer. I'm the Director of Finance and Operations. Jeff Thompson is our Director of Human Resources. Shelley Strasser, our Director of Recreation, and Beth Kaler, our Director of Communication and Community Relations. So as we move forward here tonight, this budget that's being presented tonight is a preliminary budget of sorts. So there are a number of factors that still need to be firmed up before we move into our final budget, which will be approved on October 26th. So these few items that are still upcoming are our third Friday count, which is this Friday. So even though our school is pushed back a week, our third Friday count remains the third Friday of September. Our equalized values of our property values will come out on October 1st. On October 15th, we have our final state aid calculation released by DPI, and we'll walk through tonight how that affects our tax levy and our mill rate. And then finally, on October 26th, our board will vote on our final 2021 budget and tax levy. And then following that meeting, our tax levy certifications will be due to the 4 municipalities by November 6th. As we go through tonight, if you have any questions, I ask that you please hold them till the end. We'll have a time to do a Q&A. So working through a 20,000 foot view of the budget and our computation. So my goal tonight is for everybody to walk away with one piece of school finance that you didn't know walking in. And hopefully you find it a little bit interesting, but we'll see about that. So starting with the revenue limit computation. It's a very complex formula, but at its base, it can be broken down into a pretty simple computation. So we'll walk through that here, and then we'll stick our own budget numbers in and show you what that actually looks like for our school district. So the base of our majority of our funding, we get about 90% of our funding through our revenue limit. So the way we calculate that is by this basic formula here. We have a revenue limit worksheet, and at the heart of it is this formula. We have our resident membership, FTE, times our per pupil amount, plus any exemptions, recurring or non-recurring, and that equals our revenue limit authority, which is the total amount of money that a district can bring in for revenue via property tax and state aid. The resident membership FTE is a 3-year average and does include 40% of FTE from summer school. So it's important that we make sure that we have programming for summer school and that our students are engaged in attending that as well. So our resident membership FTE is a 3-year average. Moving to the per pupil dollar amount, this generally in the second year of a state biennial budget, which is what we're moving into in the 2021 fiscal year, is the easier of the two of every other fiscal year. It's the easier one to predict because there's no prediction that has to happen. Our state puts out a biennial budget, and the second year is set within that biennial budget. However, as with many things, COVID has complicated this. So our per pupil budget that is currently in state statute allows an additional $179 per pupil from the 1920 budget for 2021. However, we are uncertain yet whether or not our state will put out a budget repair bill, which could decrease the amount that we get per pupil for our funding. So in order to have a conservative approach to this 2021 fiscal year budget, we reduced our per pupil amount by $50 rather than the $179 increase. So the conservative approach, that $50 decrease is what we're going to see here in this calculation. So when we plug in our actual numbers, this is what we see. We have a resident membership FTE, again, a 3-year average of 8,096 students times a per pupil dollar amount of $10,244 plus a whole bunch of exemptions, non-recurring exemptions. So I'll walk through a couple of these here, and they equate to about $7 million for us. I got to move you guys out of the way. So we have a declining enrollment exemption and a hold harmless, and these two components together essentially soften the blow of declining enrollment, because as you can see, the base of our revenue is based on our resident membership. So as we decline, we will receive less money, and this declining enrollment exemption and the hold harmless essentially bring us back up so that we're not losing as much money in a single year as we would without those exemptions. We also have an energy efficiency exemption and private school voucher exemption, which increases our revenue limit. With this equation, then our revenue limit is $89,932,759 projected for the 2021 fiscal year. So that is the first part of the computation is to find the total revenue limit authority. The second part then is to calculate the tax levy. So we take that number that we just calculated, that $89.9 million, we subtract out our equalization aid to find our total revenue limit tax levy. So the equalization aid and the tax levy essentially work like a balancing scale. So if equalization aid goes up, tax levy goes down. If equalization aid goes down, tax levy goes up. So sometimes I hear, I'll read articles or hear in the news that a school district received more aid. That doesn't necessarily equate to more dollars. It just means a lower tax levy. So as we plug in our own numbers in this calculation, you're seeing that revenue limit authority, that $89.9 million, is the same number that we calculated in step 1. We subtract out our aids. So the biggest portion of that is our equalization aid. We also have high poverty aid, computer aid, and personal property aid. And that equates to our revenue limit tax levy. So this is the tax levy then that we take to the next step. So calculating the total tax levy, that step that we just did was calculating a portion of it. So we have our tax levy then for Fund 10 and Fund 38 that we we start with the total amount that we just calculated, that 34.5 million. We have to reduce the amount that's allowable for Fund 10 by our Fund 38 debt payments, which we'll go into. And that gets us our Fund 10 and our Fund 38 levies. We also then add in, if we have it, community service tax levy, which is our Fund 80 tax levy, and if applicable, any prior year levy chargebacks. So when we do this, we'll plug in our $3 million from Fund 80, which is the same value that we've plugged in for the last few years for Fund 80. So the Fund 80 rec tax levy is not increasing. And we come to our total school-based tax levy of $37.5 million, again, projected for 2021. And then the final step in calculating the mill rate, which is really the number that affects our taxpayers, is we take that total tax levy we just calculated, we divide it by our total equalized property value, multiply it by 1,000, and we get our mill rate. So we take that 37.5 million, we divide it by the 4.6 billion that we have in equalized property value, and multiply that by 1,000 to get our mill rate, our projected mill rate at this time of $8.14. So again, we just went from calculating the revenue limit to finding the tax levy to calculating the mill rate. And at its heart, it's not too complicated, but there are a lot of factors when we take a step back and actually look at the revenue limit worksheet that really muddies it up and makes it more complicated. But this at its base is the foundation of the formula. So just a quick look at our previous revenue limit. Our revenue limit history over the last 10 years is kind of interesting. So you can see here we had after the 2010-11 to the 2011-12 school years. If you'll recall, this was Act 10. And at that time is when the state reduced school revenue per pupil allocations by $500. So this is when we see that dramatic drop in our revenue limit. And then we slowly increase over the years. And as now we're starting to see the results of our declining enrollment. And again, it's a 3-year rolling average. So it's going to take us some time as we decline to start seeing that dip in our revenue limit. And we begin to start seeing it here this year. And this is my favorite graph. This is our equalization aid and tax levy trends. So this is an exact depiction of how equalization aid and tax levy work like a balancing scale. So if one goes up, the other goes down. The way equalization aid is calculated, the way that the state says, this is how much this school district gets, and this is how much this school district gets, is it's how property rich or property poor, and I put that in quotes, a school district is compared to the state average. And what that means is essentially a formula of how much property values are within your municipalities divided by your student count, your FTE. So if your property values are increasing at a slower rate than the state average, then your equalization is going to go up. So the state's going to say, we're going to give you a little bit more money so that your taxpayers have to foot less of the bill. So you can see back in 2010, 11, 11, 12, 12, 13, we had a higher tax levy than we had equalization aid. At some point that kind of leveled out, and now we're seeing it completely flip in the opposite direction where we have more equalization aid and a lower tax levy. As a result, you'll see the same thing happen with our mill rate because the tax levy is dropping. Our mill rate, we'll see in this slide, is also beginning to have a similar effect. So we had a few years here, 6 or 7 years here, where we had a very stable mill rate. And now with our tax levy, our revenue limit, and then our tax levy declining, we're going to see a drop for a few years coming here. So it's just important to note the history of our mill rate. If we ever were to increase again, we can see that here in this year, the few years that we were pretty steady, those 6 or 7 years, we are about $1.50 to $2 under what that had been for quite some time. So we'll go into our 20,000 foot view of our budget now within each fund. So the state says every school district has to break out their revenue into various funds, and these are kept in separate buckets based on the types of expenses that you have during for each of those, within each of those buckets. So our general fund is our Fund 10, and this is where most of our transactions happen. This is for our general, to support our general education programs. We also have then in the funds in the 20s, our funds 21 and 27, which are called special projects funds. So we have Fund 21, called Special Revenue Trust Fund, which is really just a fancy name, way of saying student activity accounts. So that's for gifts and donations from private parties. When a teacher would receive a Coles grant, this is where it would be tracked. The school would track it separate from their building budget in a Fund 21 account. Fund 27 is our special education fund. So this is where we have those expenses that support our exceptional educational needs for our students. So we'll take a look at our Fund 10 and Fund 27 revenues together, as these are generally our dollars that go to supporting the education of our students. When we look at our Fund 10 and Fund 27 revenues as a whole, we can see the property tax portion is much smaller, and a significant portion, 55% of our revenues, come from general state aid. We have categorical aid of about 3%. We have open enrollment of about 6%. So that means when a student comes into open enrolls into our district, we receive a set dollar amount for each of those students. And when a student open enrolls out of our district, we have to pay that school district that same dollar amount per pupil. So this portion here is the revenue that we receive when a student open enrolls into our school district. A portion of our revenues come from grants. AGR here that is listed is the Achievement Gap Reduction Grant. It's previously known as SAGE, and those dollars right now go to supporting our coaching within our school district. And there's a small portion that is considered other. So broken down into dollars, you can see the local sources, which is going to be our taxes at about 31 million. We have our interdistrict payments, which would be our open enrollments at about 7 million. We have state sources, which is our aids, federal sources, which is many of our grants. And then there's a small portion of about $100,000. I say small in the big scheme of things, of other sources. And then our total projected revenues between Fund 10 and Fund 27 is projected $110,835,412.30. And I'm going to spend a significant amount of time on this slide because this really is the focus and highlights of our 2021 fiscal year budget. So we take what we now know in terms of our revenues, and we have that much money to work with to support our goals and our strategic plan for our 2021 expenses. So where we left off last in terms of the budget was we met in June, and our board approved a preliminary budget that had a deficit of about $1.1 million. And it's very normal for us in our history to approve a deficit budget of that. It's only about 1% of our budget. And we do have factors that firm up along the way, and so far have been able to have balanced budgets in the most recent fiscal years, even though we have approved a deficit budget of about $1 million in June before the fiscal year starts on July 1. So when we did that in June, we were projecting a health insurance increase of 20%. We have since heard from WEA that our health insurance was a 1.5% increase. And with a minor tweak in our plan, we were able to bring it down to 1.3%, which is significant. So this factor alone now means that this budget we're looking at tonight is a balanced budget. This was a $1.1 million, almost to the penny, what our deficit was when we looked at our preliminary budget last in June. So this 1.3% health insurance increase kept other factors the same and allowed us to balance our budget. However, at the same point, when we met in June last, our school building budgets had an allocation of 75% of their full allocation, and the leadership and learning and business office department budgets were reduced, and that is still in this budget as is. We have funds dedicated within this budget to support each phase of our return to school plan, including our learning management system, electronic devices, supplies, and equipment. We also have our teacher computer refresh happening this year. So as many companies are backlogged, electronic technology companies are backlogged, we are looking forward to having our computers out hopefully in the December to January timeframe for our teachers, that they'll get swapped out. So their old computer will be swapped out for a new one. We also have a significant amount of CARES funds supported within this budget that's helping support additional expenses within this budget. So CARES funds are made up of two components. We have federal funds, which are ESSER, and we have state funds, which are GEER, GEER funds. The state funds are to be expensed within this fiscal year, and the federal funds are to be expensed within the next 2 fiscal years. So our goal is to have about $500,000 remaining next year for additional, if we need them, expenses in the 21-22 fiscal year. We'll have a better idea of what needs will be as we move through this fiscal year. So some of the items that the CARES funding will be supporting are emergency health room monitors. So those are the people that will be hired specifically to help staff our isolation rooms, for lack of a better word. So the room that if a student or a staff member is thinking that they may have a positive case of COVID, that's where they would go until they're able to be picked up from school. And so that was important for our leadership team to not just assign somebody who already exists to the isolation room for COVID cases, but rather to hire somebody who knows exactly what they're signing up for. And we actually have, I think, about 10 people hired so far for our emergency health room monitors. We also have limited telecommuting being supported from our CARES funding. So 1.8% of our total FTE within our district are the amount of positions that we have available for telecommuting. And those are positions for both ADA accommodations, and there are a few limited positions available for people who are not valid ADA accommodations, but rather concerned. So based on a point system, our staff can apply for those limited telecommuting positions and potentially be allowed to telecommute when our students do come back into school. So sorry, telecommuting just means essentially working from home. And then we have additional PPE, cleaning supplies. We have purchased ozone cleaners and Clorox 360 machines, which are going to be our deep cleaning days. And then we have additional classroom supplies so that students aren't sharing like they normally would in a regular environment, and additional electronic devices, including chargers, iPads, computers, and hotspots. We also have dedicated funds for additional special ed programming needs, because we know this is really coming to the forefront at a time like this when we're virtually learning and when we start getting our students back into a routine within school. We have dedicated funds for professional development opportunities. So many of our teachers went through Blue Dot training, which is our high-tech high coaching this summer. We have a 1.81% CPI increase built into this budget. So while it hasn't been distributed yet, our board has indicated that teacher salaries and staff salaries are a priority of our budgets. And so our board has communicated that they wanted this 1.81% CPI increase in here. And now we're able to have a balanced budget with our 1.81% CPI increase. We have also communicated that we will not be moving forward with the CPI increase until all of our budget factors are known and we know whether or not we'll be receiving a budget repair bill from the state. We also have collaboration starting up again. We will be starting up again with our compensation committee. So this was work that was moving along quite nicely during the school year last year, and then COVID put a halt to that. So we will be back up and running with our compensation committee this school year to develop a sustainable compensation model. And we know that that's going to be challenging amid future state budgets that are unknown, along with declining enrollment. So there will be some tough conversations that have to happen, but our board is committed to creating a sustainable compensation model for our staff. We also have a focus on equity within funding schools with varying needs. So there's not just a set formula. There's equity sort of built in to our funding formulas within schools. There's a human aspect to that. It's not just a math equation. And we also have a conservative approach to our per pupil revenue that we've talked through so far tonight. So that means rather than having the $179 increase that's currently in the state budget, we are budgeting with a $50 decrease per pupil until we know more from the state. So that whole page put into a nice simple picture is what this is. So our salaries and benefits always make up the majority of our budget. So within our budget this year, we're projected to see about 64% of our expenses within Fund 10 and Fund 27 go towards salaries and benefits. And then purchase services is our next greatest chunk. So purchase services are anytime we pay an individual, an individual contractor or a company. So things like professional development, or if we have to hire somebody for hard of hearing or deaf student instruction, those are the types of things that would go towards purchase services, in addition to paying our WeEnergies bill. We also have a smaller portion that's makes up our supplies, capital equipment, debt retirement, insurance, and this insurance here is our property and liability insurance. and then transfers. So you'll see 9% of our budget within Fund 10 goes towards transfers. And that significant portion of that is made up of our transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 27. So every year we have to make sure our Fund 27 fund balance is at zero. Basically what that means is that our revenues match our expenses. And it's very normal within every school district that you have to make a transfer to make that happen, because we do not receive enough funding within Fund 27 to support all of our Fund 27 expenses. So this year, our transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 27 is about $10 million. So that put into numbers looks like this. I won't go through every single one, but the bottom line is that our total Fund 10 and Fund 27 projected expenditures will be $120,646,280.74. So if we subtract out our transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 27 from this dollar amount, we'll see that our Fund 10 and Fund 27 revenues and expenses match, which means we have a balanced budget. Moving into Funds 38 and 39. So these are our debt service funds. Our debt service funds are used to record transactions related to general obligation debt principal and interest. So they are kept separate for a reason. Fund 38 debt is non-referendum debt. Fund 39 debt is referendum debt. So unless a school district has an approved referendum, there should be no Fund 39 debt. Any debt within Fund 38 subtracts or reduces the amount that we are then able to spend in Fund 10 each fiscal year, depending on the amount of debt payments we have to make that year. So looking at Fund 38, again, this is the debt that is within the revenue limit. So it reduces the amount we are able to spend in Fund 10 in our general fund. Our tax levy is how we get all of our revenue from Fund 38. $3,833,313.50 is what will be going towards our Fund 38 tax levy. And that revenue is based on the 2021 calendar year, as opposed to our expenses, which are based on the 2021 fiscal year. And you can see here the breakdown of principal and interest payments. So our expenses in our Fund 38 debt will be $3,854,013.50. And then this is a nice easy slide. There is no Fund 38 debt. So we have paid that off a few years ago, and so no revenues and no expenses go towards Fund 39. And you can see that reflected in this graph. So our Fund 39 is the light blue, and that was complete in 17-18. We paid off our last portion of our Fund 39 debt. And so going forward now, we just have our Fund 38 debt. And this year you can see about $3 million, a little bit less than last year. Moving on to the funds in the 40s. So our funds 46 and 49 are capital improvement funds. So Fund 46 is long-term capital improvement trust fund, and Fund 49 is our other capital improvement levy fund. Within Fund 46, this is where we make that annual transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 46 to save for our turf field replacement plan. And again, no expenses just yet. That plan, the first phase of replacing those turf fields is in fall of 22. So not just yet. And then within Fund 49, this is where our energy efficiency projects and our focus on energy dollars live in terms of expenses. So they're all within that purchase service bucket. And we have about almost $300,000 in remaining energy efficiency projects that we are able to spend. So essentially our energy efficiency projects that were approved through resolution came in under budget by about $300,000. So we're able to spend those dollars on projects that still fall under that resolution. So we'll be spending those on Hales parking lot lighting and roofing at Lane and Jefferson. And then the other portion of those dollars are made up of focus on energy dollars. And so we have about $550,000 to spend from focus on energy. So we'll be doing in Walker's parking lot, a seal and restripe of the parking lot, and then roofing needs at Hale, Jefferson, Madison, Pershing, and Wilson. So this is really important, and we're kind of fortunate that we have these focus on energy dollars to spend, because we have a project, Hale's parking lot, cost about $1 million, which was what was in the budget this year for our capital improvement. It almost looked up the whole capital improvement projects budget. So having these, being able to still move forward on schedule with our roofing projects is a really awesome thing. Moving on to Fund 50. So again, another fund that the state makes us keep separate. And this one's actually federal. There's a lot of federal regulations with food service. So it's kept separate from the general fund. And if there is a fund balance at the end of the year, it must be used for food service. So a little bit of a bummer. I wish that we could change this rule, but if we have a surplus in Fund 50 in food service, we can't purchase computers for classrooms. Instead, we have to keep that money within food service, which we do have, and the state makes you spend it. So we have a few projects that are moving along right now. So we'll just take a high level look at our Fund 50 revenues and expenses. You can see bottom line that expenses are greater than our revenues, and that's intentional. Generally, we wouldn't see that within Fund 50. It would at least be balanced. But here you can see we are in the process of, and it will be finished before our students get here, is finishing our coolers and freezers installation at Hale, Central, and FLW. And then we also are able to spend additional dollars on making sure that our serving is all set and ready for when our students return to school. So we've purchased, there's a lot of items for individual packaging of meals. And then we have additional sneeze guards and serving trays that we're able to purchase with our Fund 50 fund balance. And while we're on the topic of food service, I thought that this was really important to throw out. So the USDA extended the program that allowed all families to receive free meals. So it's the same program that was functioning in the spring and summer this past seasons. And so this is going to continue through December 31st is what we know right now from the USDA. So our pickup days for meals are Mondays and Wednesdays. Mondays, students and families would receive 2 meals, and that is breakfast and lunch for each of those days, and Wednesdays, 3 meals. We have pickup times of 9 to 11 a.m. And shout out to everybody who gave us feedback on this topic. We do have now early hours at Dockey beginning at 7:30 for those families who were not able to start at 9. So thank you for the feedback on that. And thank you to Sodexo for being able to turn on a dime and make this work for us and for our families. And then the pickup locations are listed here. And we also have complete information listed in our return to school plan, which can be easily found online. So last but not least, our last major fund is Fund 80, which is our Recreation Community Services Fund. So this, again, is separate from our general fund budget and includes programming for adult education, community recreation programs, and care services. So most notably in Fund 80, we were able to work very conservatively within our budget for many years and have built a recreation center that is nearly complete to the public eye. There's a few minor things that are still ongoing. And it is just an absolutely beautiful facility that is available for our staff. So, and community, I should say. So here we can see the outside of the building. There's nice flow for our staff, cubbies, storage. It just is a really awesome resource that is now available for our community. Here we have our new gymnasium within the rec center. So this shot I like a lot because it's an aerial shot from the second floor walking track that circles the gymnasium. So that is a really neat feature. And then on the right up here, we can see a studio room that is available for classes, and with those blue dots on the floor that we are all too familiar with at this point to make sure that people are staying there 6 feet apart. So again, that community recreation building did not increase our tax levy at all. So that $3 million is maintaining the same as previous years, and that complete project is funded from Fund 80 fund balance. Our fees are our local sources, and this historically has been about $1 million, so it's reduced by half. So Fund 80 is taking a significant hit from COVID in terms of the revenue that it's bringing in. So unfortunately, we were forced to make some difficult decisions and make sure that our expenses matched our revenue so that we weren't dipping into Fund 80 fund balance. So that is where we see where rec really took a hit in revenue. On the right side, we have our salaries and benefits. We have our purchase services. Again, salaries and benefits taking up the majority of our budget. Purchase services, supplies, and then the building construction is what's remaining. So we have about $700,000 that are left in expenses for our main facility, and then the remaining will be going to building a garage that'll be next to our new rec center. And here we can see our projected beginning fund balance plus our revenues minus our expenses equals our projected ending fund balance within Fund 80. So moving back to big picture now, tax levy. So we just worked through our whole funds at all of our all funds budget at a 20,000 foot view, and moving now into the details of what this means for our projected tax levy. We have our Fund 10 levy and our Fund 38 levy. So again, we calculated that together, and then we have to first subtract out our Fund 38 debt payments, and whatever's left gets to go to Fund 10. So the less we have in Fund 38, the more we get to spend in Fund 10. So that left us with a projected Fund 10 levy of $30,715,840. In Fund 38, our levy will be $3,833,313 for total revenue limit levies of $34,549,153 and then we add in our Fund 80 levy, which is in addition to our revenue limit levies of $3 million, and we come out with a total proposed property tax levy of $37,549,154. And putting that into a nice little graph here, we can see the majority of our budget is from our, majority of our tax levy is supporting our general fund, 10% is for our debt service fund, and 8% is for our community service fund. And looking at comparison from last year to this year, from our 1920 levy to our projected 2021 levy is a decrease of about 10%. So recall that we have declining enrollment, and we also have, so that's reducing our revenue limit as a whole, but we also have an increase in equalization, which is decreasing our tax levy. So that's where we can see then our tax levy is decreasing. And then last but not least, is our mill rate comparison from year to year. So we have a projected decrease of about 11%. So going from 9.24 in 1920, which was ironically about in the middle of the pack. We looked at 14 school districts, and we were about right in the middle in 1920, although I don't know what other districts are, how they're moving for 2021 just yet. But we'll be dropping about $1 next year. And again, it's just important to note our history. This is a pretty significant drop from where we're fairly steady for about 7 years there. And with that concludes our presentation. So Stephanie, I don't know if you want to handle any questions that come forward or gather questions.
So right now, the first set of questions we would take from board members to see if there's any questions regarding the presentation for Caitlin. Caitlin, could you stop sharing for a second so I can see everybody? Thank you. Any board members have any questions for Caitlin? Jeff, go ahead.
You're breaking up a little bit. Did you call on me?
I did.
Thank you. Caitlin, question for you. First, a comment. Thank you for all your work. I can't imagine what that is. I have trouble balancing my checkbook. But on slide 20 of the PowerPoint, the other sources listed local, state, federal, and interdistrict. Even though it was only $100,000, can you give an example of what an other source would be, please?
Yep, definitely. So other would be gate fees, donations. We have, yeah, those would be the main ones. Gate fees, school fees.
Okay, thank you.
Any other board member questions? Noah? Well, I think when you come unmuted, so when you went unmuted, I'm like, oh, okay, that's the next person's question.
Thank you. Actually, I want to roll off of Jeff's question. There was in our revenue, I believe it was revenue, or maybe, no, I'm sorry, I think it was the expenses slide. There was an other section that was a little over $11 million. It was right underneath the capital expenditure, which was like 38,200. Can you give an example of, because 11 million is kind of a big number. I presume that's a lot of small things together.
Yep. So Stephanie, are you cool if I share again for
Yep,
the
go ahead.
Okay, so in this slide, we have our Fund 10 and Fund 27 expenditures, salaries, benefits, purchase, service, supply, capital equipment, and then we lump these last three right here, debt service, debt retirement, insurance, and transfers into this other objects.
Okay.
So the majority of that 11.7 million is a $10 million transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 27.
All right. Okay, thank you. And then the other thing was, and we talked about, and we always do a conservative estimate on our per pupil aid, but I'm gonna steal a little bit of Dr. Lexman's thunder, but when he talks about the most recent tax receipts, we're actually looking better than was projected when they passed the budget initially. So, I mean, I don't want to count any chickens here, but that might seem like we at least would get what was promised initially in that biennial budget. And if so, do we have any thoughts on what those extra dollars would be utilized for? Would we be putting that back towards the reductions in building budgets that we had, or is there other thoughts at all about that?
Yep, that's a really great point. So yes, the state did come out and say that we were better than they thought we would be at the end of last fiscal year, meaning through June 30th, 2020. But they're using still words like looming budget in the future, and some pretty scary terms, I guess, for lack of a better word, for a future budget. So I'm not sure how conservative the state's going to be now for this 2021 fiscal year, or if they're just going to kind of put it off to the next fiscal year. We'll see what they come out with for that. In terms of if the state doesn't come out with a budget repair bill and we still get that $179 increase in per pupil revenue, what we'll do next is meet as a finance committee to talk through those various channels that those additional funds could go towards. Generally, what we would do first is undo any cuts that were made in a preliminary budget and then reassign dollars in any other ways. But certainly looking for board feedback on if there are other recommendations on that. So we'll first meet as a board finance committee, and then we'll bring that back to the full board before our final budget is approved at the end of October.
Okay, thank you.
I could jump in here with that. So thanks, Caitlin. A couple of the big things that we continue to talk about that we will struggle to fund going forward. One is, a compensation model in particular focused on teachers to bring us right. What we committed to is to try to move over a number of years to at least the regional average, because we're on the low end. And the other one is initiating a change in retiree healthcare benefit, and it's a change that would change it from a defined plan to contributions to an HRA that employees would then access to pay for their own health care. And that takes because for a while you're running two systems. You're running kind of the system that people are currently retiring into, and then trying to build a new system that is more predictable long-term financially. But for a while you have to fund both. And so when you have an opportunity in a budget where maybe there is a surplus, those are some of the big conversations that will need to be had. But just like Caitlin said, starting with the board finance committee to figure out what are the priorities we want to focus on, if in fact we have the opportunity to do that, which we would really welcome. It'd be a great thing, be a great problem to have right now.
Any other board member questions? Let's see everybody, hold on.
Sorry, I'm stopping. If I was still sharing.
The only limitation really was Zoom, was to be
Yes.
able to see everybody or see the screen, so. Board member questions. All right, we'll move on then to questions and comments from our public. Anybody who is on that has questions regarding the budget, now is the time to kind of raise your hand and we will recognize those questions. Don't have any of those at the moment. All right, we will go on to any concluding remarks that you have, Caitlin.
Just want to say thanks to our administrative team, who we've talked this a number of times, together in our board finance committee. There's a lot of conversations that happen that lead up to a presentation like this. So thanks to everybody for your support, and looking forward to how this 2021 budget ends up. We'll look forward to hearing, hopefully, that we don't have a state budget repair bill, but we'll keep an eye on that and keep the board and the public updated.
Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you to you and your team and everybody that put all the hard work into all of this. Looking forward to getting this to the finish line. And again, this will come before the board for the official budget and tax levy adoption on October 26th. So that is the next time that it is on the calendar following our board, our approved budget calendar. So everyone knows when that's coming. All right, then we move on to item 7 this evening, which is public comments not related to the budget hearing. At this point, if you would have a comment that you'd like to make, if you could just unmute or put your name in the chat, and we'll make sure that you get recognized and have a couple minutes to speak.
Hi, can I go? My name's Amy Riley.
Yep, Amy, you just go ahead and give your name and your address for our record, and then you'll have up to 3 minutes to address the group.
Amy Riley, 2115 South 97th Street. I am calling for multiple reasons, but if I only have 3 minutes, I guess I'll start with the fact that schools, at least my two children's Wednesdays is a cleaning day when they're not even, they're virtual. So whose brilliant idea was that when there's no school, and most likely will not be this year when there has to be under 50 cases in West Dallas, and as of the 13th there was 1,500 cases. So let's just be honest that it's doubtful they're going to go back this year. So in my opinion, that's just an extra day for the teachers to be off.
Does that conclude your comments, Amy, or did you want to continue for the next minute and a half?
I just was looking at the chart that was from the meeting where this was all brought up, and, you know, 53% of parents wanted school to go back and only 26% of teachers wanted to go back. So it's just amazing to me how the teachers won out on this. So just obviously an upset parent, and I've spoken to the principals both several times, and they said that this is really my only forum to get my voice heard on this topic, because, you know, there's no other way for any changes to be made.
Thank you, Amy. Were there any other public comments this evening? Okay, we'll then move on to item 8, superintendent's report. Dr. Lechman.
Great, thank you, and good evening, everybody. We're going to be doing, going forward here, is in the superintendent's report for the next several months, I would imagine. We're going to start with an update on our returning to school plan. And so I asked Deidre to share screen and to help me navigate, because the last meeting I tried to do this, I kept bouncing around trying to navigate it. So Deidre is going to help me through this. So Deidre, if you'd go ahead and go to our next slide. So what we're going to cover here are the health metrics that we're using, and maybe I can clarify a little bit of something, a little bit of the information tied to what Amy Riley shared. And then the learning expectations on Wednesdays, we've been working to clarify that. And we started, you know, with school on a Tuesday, and suddenly we're in a Wednesday. And so we didn't have much lead time going into that, but we're working to clarify that. Then I'll talk a little bit about our distance learning preparation and then next steps. So in terms of the health metrics, this is what we currently have up on our Returning to School Guide website. And we update this each week as the state updates Milwaukee County status, as well as we also receive from the West Allis, West Milwaukee data from the West Allis Health Department, exactly where we are. And so the idea of that there were 1,500 cases recently is different than what we're using as our metrics, right? We're using the COVID burden status, which is a 14-day average of cases per 100,000. And so that's different. And when we were told to close schools in March, we were in the 200s. when we made the decision, even though parents had indicated their preferences and teachers had indicated their preferences, when we made the decision to start all virtual, we were in the 500s in terms of the COVID burden status, which meant our health department strongly recommended, although it was still our decision, they strongly recommended we start all virtual. And for us to move to phase 2, which would go from virtual to distance learning, which is bringing students in 2 days a week on a rotation basis, we would need to get to 100 or lower in the COVID burden status for both Milwaukee County and West Allis, West Milwaukee. And we've been making progress. So in the dashboard here, you can see where we are in high, medium, low. And when we hit the 100, then we're in the medium, which is distance learning. But within the dashboard here, we're indicating where we are in the high, medium, low, then also what the trend is. So it's either going to be an up arrow, a down arrow, or a sideways, which means it's trending kind of flat or level, which is the most recent for Milwaukee County. In West Allis, it's been trending down, and I've received that information once a week. And we also have the active links here where anybody visiting the website can go and look at where this data is coming from directly. And so in the column under Milwaukee County, there's a link there to Wisconsin Department of Health Services. You don't have to go to it, Deidre, but then the 14-day care trend, which has been green all along, is available through Milwaukee County. And then for each week, there's a link to a document the West Allis Health Department shares, and that's where, where the word high in the column of metric 2 is an active link to that document. And so we're moving in the right direction for us, and we're hoping that the numbers continue to improve, although Wisconsin has set some records in terms of new cases recently, which is a concern. And what we're learning is that quite a bit of that has to do right now with colleges and universities coming back online, and college students are still doing what college students do when they come back to college. And they're gathering and partying, and that seems to be contributing in those counties to higher numbers. And so we hope that doesn't have a negative impact on the metrics we're using, but we should see that in the next week or two. So if you go ahead, then in terms of our virtual learning approach, overall, it's going well. We knew this wouldn't be an easy thing to implement, and to try to implement it at a higher level than what we did when we had to kind of flip learning on an emergency basis in the spring. But we're using Schoology, and as of September 10th, there have been a lot of logins, and these have, of course, gone up quite a bit since then in just 4 days. So we had over 10,000 parents logging in and 31,000 student logins. And obviously we have many fewer students than 31,000. So kids have multiple times a day that they would log into different courses. That's why we hit 31,000. We have established more rigorous expectations than we set forward in the spring. And in essence, what we've done is implementing a kind of typical school day that a student would experience when they were coming to buildings, but doing it all virtually. And that's a pretty high bar to set. And so we know that for some families, it is truly a challenge. And for some learners, working through Zoom all day is just too much. And so we're doing what we do under normal circumstances, is we're working with families to adapt, right? So that when things aren't working for families, schools work out individual plans to help things work out for families and for individual students. And so if we have any families that are listening, watching in this evening, and if there are struggles with the virtual learning, that's where it really begin, is to contact your school and start to have a conversation with your teacher, with your principal, about how things can be adapted so things really work for individual students. And then there are some interesting, maybe long-term advantages that I just wanted to point out. Now that we're really building kind of rigorous, robust approach to using virtual learning, there may be things like snow days that actually don't impact learning in the same way as we had always thought of in the past. It may not be a day of learning lost. It just is a day where it's just not safe to go to school buildings. And things like power outages, or when there's not water available in a building, we would close school and lose a day of learning. We'll have the infrastructure and the experience to be able to turn to a Central or a Nathan Hale and say, okay, without water today, you're going to be logging into Schoology. So we think there may be some interesting advantages going forward. So in terms of learning expectations on Wednesdays, elementary is really a normal virtual learning day. And it's normal in quotes just because none of this is truly normal. But learning goes on Wednesdays, even though it is a day where when we come back to distance learning, there won't be students kind of in buildings on Wednesdays, but virtual learning goes on Wednesdays so that there's a day for cleaning. Right now we have a good number of teachers that teach from classrooms. We're allowing it to be a choice for teachers. So some teachers want to be in their classroom because they have access to materials and whiteboards. They also, it may be a more quiet environment for them. But on Wednesdays, when we come back to distance learning, we will be asking all teachers to teach from home. And that's really out of a courtesy for custodians and cleaners so that they're able to move from one end of the building to the next end of the building, go through every single classroom with ozone machines, with the Clorox 360 machines. And they're not interrupting teachers that are teaching from classrooms and asking them to move and have to wait for 2 hours. And so it's really a courtesy for our custodians to allow for efficient cleaning as we work through. But Wednesdays really for elementary are a normal learning day. In secondary, we call it a check and connect day. So Deidre, if you kind of click on that active link there to open that document. And so this is the document that put together and Beth has helped clarify exactly kind of what students should be doing and what teachers should be doing in secondary schools on Wednesdays. And secondary is intermediate and high schools. So students are logging in. It is an attendance day for secondary students, just like elementary. They're working on projects, they're completing coursework, they're working on their online platforms, so Alex and Math and StudySync and English Language Arts. And they're also checking in with teachers as needed and directed. And when I talk through what teachers are doing, that'll make sense. And then we're, like we've said earlier, we're asking all teachers to record new learning, record presentations of, that is new instruction. And that becomes a really powerful tool, not only now, but going forward for students that maybe missed that particular day or that period and need to go back, or they just want to rewatch it because they didn't understand it the first time. So for intermediate and high schools, teachers on these kind of work planning days check and connect. So there really is a 2-hour block for open office hours. And that's where students then can reach out to their teachers and meet with teachers one-on-one or in small groups. There's about a 2-hour block to work with small groups or individual students who are struggling. And so we're asking teachers to really monitor virtual learning because it is not a solution for every student. And then teachers are going to be rectifying school records because taking attendance in secondary schools is pretty complicated when we're set up in Skyward as a 7-period day, but we're running kind of sort of a block schedule. So students aren't secondary students are running in and out of 7 Zooms a day. So it's some time to rectify records. And then teachers are uploading videos and providing assignments for what students should be doing on Wednesdays. And so that really is what should be happening on Wednesday. So that was the work to clarify that. So that's really kind of the rest of the bullets on that slide that I just talked through. And so if you go to the next one. So where we are in distance learning preparation. And so again, based on health metrics, when we get to 100 or lower, both in Milwaukee County, COVID burden and West Allis, West Milwaukee, we'll be announcing and hopefully with about a 2-week notice to parents that we'll be moving to distance learning. And so that's 2 days a week, different groups of kids coming into buildings, starting with elementary and then shortly thereafter secondary schools. So the final preparations are taking place, and a lot of this is really logistics and making sure we have a safe and functioning environment. So we developed a checklist for all schools. So if you could open that, Deidre. And so you could stop right there. So this is our distance learning checklist to help schools really just think through all of the things that need to be prepared for as we work to bring teachers and students back into buildings. So there's 16 topics, and when we first discussed the idea of putting this tool together, I committed to taking kind of the first draft of it. And I told the team, I'm going to try to be as concise and make this as manageable as possible for principals and our school leadership teams. And we ended up with 16 topics and 7 pages of things to check off. So it didn't end up concise, but we I think were thorough and thoughtful. And so it kind of works through all of the things that need to be prepared for. Yeah, you can just scroll a little bit, Deidre, so everybody kind of gets a little bit of a feel. And so we're asking schools then to customize this. So where there is a shared Google folder in kind of our Google sphere, and every school has a version of this that then they can add unique things that are important for them to think about because of their buildings or their learning community. And so it really is, do you have a plan for this, yes or no? And if there is a little descriptor, or many schools have been already working on these things since the beginning of our planning over the summer, and many have links. And so what we're asking them to do is to complete this as we move towards distance learning, so that when we have questions from parents or members of the community about what exactly we're doing, so I would have a place to go into the shared Google document and pull up exactly what Horace Mann is doing in a particular question. I would have access to it right away for a parent, and anybody in the leadership team would as well. And so this is what we're working on right now, and schools working through this. And tomorrow, in fact, the leadership team of our district is starting to do very short school by school Zoom meetings with every school leadership team just to check in on this. So how is this going? What questions do you have? What are you running into that we can help with? And it's also an opportunity for us to really listen how different schools are solving the problems in order to do the connection across schools. And as we discover solutions in one school, we may say, why don't you call over to Hoover, because we think they may have a solution for you here at Horace Mann. And so we're using that as an opportunity to kind of bridge solutions or share solutions across schools. We will be communicating some adjusted elementary school start protocols. And what that means is we're sensitive to the fact that the typical way elementary schools start, especially schools that have lots of students that walk to school, is kids start to kind of gather outside in the playground or out in front of the school, and they're all in one big group. And because of social distancing and trying to manage cohorts of students, because again, I've said this many times, once we have kids in school, we're trying really hard to keep them there. So we're going to be communicating that we're asking parents to really try as much as possible not to bring students to school until 8:25 in the morning, knowing that we start letting them in right at 8:30. So it limits some of that gathering. Different schools will have different protocols, but parents should expect to see. I'm going to use Madison as an example. It is a school that has many families that walk with kids from the immediate neighborhood, and they may see signs out in front going down the sidewalk of, so if you're gathering and you're in this teacher's grade, this is where you gather. So we get the parents and kids kind of gathered in little cohorts that they learn with during the day rather than just gathering all together. And then we're using elementary recess as mask breaks, and masks are going to be encouraged when students are playing near one another. So again, in the 6 feet, but because they're outside, there's a little less risk. But we want kids to, elementary kids in particular, to have opportunities for mask breaks. We did have a conversation about, shared balls at recess and before and after school, and shared playground equipment. And the response there is we're not sanitizing kickballs and swing sets. We're sanitizing children. And I think it's an important message, so that is, and each school then have a plan as kids exit for recess. There's a cart there that has the hand sanitizer on it and their wipes, and the same thing when they come back in. And so the expectation is that they're using hand sanitizer and they're coming back in with dirty hands. The recommendations are that they wash their hands first with soap and water, and then use hand sanitizer. So that's where we are with the distance learning preparation. And then finally, in next steps, we're finalizing that. So just like I said, we're meeting school by school. And then like we communicated earlier, implementing a learning choice verification. It's kind of a phone survey, and it really comes down to 2 questions. We're asking for some feedback on how virtual learning is going. And it's really 1 is it's not going well at all, and 5, it's going great. But also a follow-up question: is there anything we can do to support you? And the people making these calls will be the the core grade level teacher for elementary students and homeroom or advisory teachers in secondary schools. So that means everybody has, between 23, 24, and maybe 30 students to call, families to call. And there's a shared Google Docs that they'll then capture this information. And then the second question, as we prepare for phases 2 and 3, which is called distance learning, we're confirming the method of instruction. So are they planning to continue virtual, or is their child going to be coming to school for distance learning, and committing to that through the end of second quarter? And so that's really what we wanted to verify, so that we're prepared for the number of students that are coming into buildings as we start distance learning. So that's the update on our returning to school guide plan.
Marty, there's a couple of comments real quick from board members.
Okay.
Would you take a comment or two at this moment, or do you want to wait?
Sure. No, you
Okay,
can go ahead.
Gary, go ahead, and then Kristen.
Okay, Marty, could you go back to the checklist that each school is filling out?
Sure, Deidre, can you jump us back over there? Maybe we lost Deidre.
I'm here. I'm just muted. There, it's back up.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
For the readiness checklist, are we setting target dates that the schools have to meet to have information placed in their document? And if any schools struggle, is the district offering help to the individual schools to get their plans in place by a certain target date?
Yes, and Deidre, help me here. I forget exactly what target date we set. And so let me jump to the second question, Gary, and then Deidre, you can jump in if you remember. So yes, we set a target date. I just don't remember what it is. And absolutely, we're going to offer support and assistance. And that's a little bit even starting tomorrow with these school by school meetings with the district office leadership team. And if we need to bring in additional support, we certainly will do that. So Deidre, do you recall what target we set to have these completed?
Caitlin, you set the target date, and so I wanted to say we set it for Friday.
We set our plexiglass date for this Wednesday. And so I believe then for the rest of the items on the list is Friday.
And again, like Marty said, the goal is that 15-minute check-in with schools, just so we can get a sense of if they need additional support from one of us, and then therefore we can assign facilities or somebody from the school support team to go and help that school get some of these things filled out, or help us to know if they need additional coverage in order to be able to do some of the things within the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Kristen, go ahead.
This is more a general can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Something in general for Marty and other directors. I'm literally teaching in person right now at a school. So that's K4 through 8th grade. So if you need any ideas of what this literally looks like, please reach out to me, because there's so much more than checklists. And I will say our kids are doing a really good job wearing their masks, and the teachers are really good with it, but there's a lot. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me, and I can let you know what we're doing and what I've done as a 4th grade teacher individually, because I'm living the dream. So just letting you know.
Appreciate that, Kristen. Yeah, thanks. And what is interesting among superintendents is, we meet every Tuesday morning. For those that have started with hybrid or some form of distance learning, they're impressed by how well kids have adapted and how conscientious even little ones are about keeping their masks on. And so that's a pleasant and encouraging surprise. So any other? Okay, then I will go on to 8.2, the legislative update. And yes, Noah stole a little bit of the thunder here, but that's all right, because it's already been explained. And so that the good news here, at least in the short term, is state revenue is beating the original 1920 projection. So despite the pandemic, that's affected the state's economy for the final quarter of the year. That our state still took in more tax revenue in 1920 than expected when the budget was signed more than 13 months ago. According to the Legislative Fiscal Bureau, the $17.5 billion the state collected was $211.8 million more than what had been estimated by Tony Evers. So what that means is that half of the extra revenue, it's about 105, almost 106 million, will go into the state's budget stabilization fund. It also often gets referred to as the rainy day fund. And then a final counting of the fiscal year, including expenditures, will be conducted in October once final spending numbers are in. And then we may hear more about exactly kind of how the additional dollars may be distributed and whether or not that's going to go into completely funding the what's currently in state statute of the per pupil dollar amount. And then in some analysis around Wisconsin K-12, so kindergarten through 12th grade spending has dropped relative to the nation. So Wisconsin Policy Forum, which does a number of studies on school districts and education in Wisconsin, released a report titled K-12 Trends Offer Caution as Tough Budget Choices Loom. So the forum uses U.S. Census Bureau data to review comparative per pupil spending trends, as well as K-12 compensation. And in terms of the per pupil spending, in 2002, Wisconsin's total spending per pupil was $8,500+ so per student, placing its statewide public K-12 spending level about 11% higher than the national average and the 12th highest in the nation. So that was in 2002. So since that time, the state's ranking has fallen. By 2018, Wisconsin expenditures of $12,285 per pupil, which has gone up quite a bit since 2002, but is now lagging the average nationwide of 12,612, and its our ranking dropped to 24th. Among Wisconsin's 4 neighboring states, only Iowa at 27th spent less per pupil in 2018. And so there's some concerns there that we're lagging nationally. Our state is lagging in investment in K-12 education. And then when they looked at school district employees between 2011 and 2018, Wisconsin average salaries per pupil increased by 7.2%, whereas the average nationwide climbed by almost twice that rate at 13.1%. And nationwide salaries and benefits combined increased by 24% between 2008 and 18, more than double the increase in Wisconsin, which was 10.4. And so Wisconsin lagged the nation in growth of total compensation between 2013 and 18 as well, with a 6.9% increase compared to 18.1 across the state. So not just school district employees, but just in general compensation within Wisconsin. So what I think is of note about this is the earlier comments about funding a compensation model, in particular focused on teachers, that brings us at least to our regional average. But it also, this analysis really points that it's going to become more and more difficult for us to attract high quality teachers when other states, in particular those very nearby, pay quite a bit more, right? So it's not only an internal challenge for our own compensation, but competing with what's happening in other states. So then at the federal level, DeVos tells states not to expect waivers from annual tests. So in a letter to state superintendents, U.S. Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos said it's an expectation that states will, in the interest of students, administer summative assessments for the 2021 school year. And that's going to be consistent with the requirements of law and following the guidance of local health officials. So we're not anticipating waivers for forward and the statewide ACT. What that's going to look like, we don't know yet. That's going to be a lot of conversations with our local health departments. If those are going to have to be in-person proctored exams, exactly how we're going to do that will be some planning. And we have lead time, but it's going to take quite a bit of planning to do that well. And then I got to bounce back to the agenda. And then in recognitions, and I'm going to, as I start this, there are a number of pretty complicated names in the recognitions this week. And I practiced probably 6 times today, and I know I'm going to get these wrong. So I'm just going to apologize up front. But it's still worth recognizing the people that are contributing so much to the work we do every day. So at Jefferson Elementary School, They received a certificate of excellence for having the highest number of students and staff participate in the West Allis Fair Housing Contest. The contest promoted equality, freedom of choice, and the importance of providing equal housing opportunities to all families, regardless of their race, color, religion, national origin, or sex. And at Shared Journeys seniors won first place for their video submission to the West Allis Fair Housing Contest. The graduates, Emily Brown, Raina Eno Barnes, Jennifer Canizaro, Emily Simolik, and Iranis Quinones did a phenomenal job on their creation. At West Allis Central High School, they are giving a big shout out to the facilities team of Harrison Giesfeld, Mark Majtorovic, Trevor Hust, and Brian Kozelik. They've done an amazing job taking care of our building during the pandemic. They deep cleaned the field house floor by hand. So it is cleaner than it has been in over 10 years. And I've been over to Central. The floors in the hallways look amazing. It's a shame kids and almost nobody else gets to see them just yet. I haven't wandered into the field house, but I want to now just because I think it'll be really impressive. At James Dotke High School, Dotke would like to recognize teachers Janine Doherty and Kaylee Bitters for their summer work that included creating the Intro to Dotke class that all students take upon entering Dotke. The class will prepare students for the project-based learning that takes place there. And I think it's a really interesting approach. I was at Dotke and got to talk to Greg Gels about this. And it's not dissimilar to what I know about international baccalaureate programs, where when students begin an international baccalaureate program in high school, they take a theory of knowledge course. And it's a foundation setting course that really prepares them for what's to come in an IB program. And so that's kind of the theory of action here with the Intro to Dotke course. It really is a foundation setting course that prepares kids to be successful in project-based learning. So I'm really excited about that work and appreciate the teachers that put the energy into it. And then finally, I'm not going to read all the names here, but a big thank you to the West Allis West Milwaukee School District Recreation and Community Services Department. It really is the summer camp staff for their hard work and dedication to creating a fun, healthy, engaging, successful summer. We had no concerns from the COVID side or the health side. I'm also just going to do my personal appreciation for the staff that worked with my niece, Ketlove Gray, who was here with me for the summer. And she had an internship with a different community-based organization, but it had a couple of days a week where she wasn't working, and I got her hooked up to the day camp at Irving. And as a graduating senior and now going into nursing, it was a really powerful experience for her. To work with some of the higher needs special education students, and very much wants to now pursue kind of pediatric nursing. So it's not just that they did a great job for our families, but they're influencing, future educators and even healthcare professionals. And then last, just a thank you to districts, students, and families. We really want to recognize everybody that's been taking the time to reading all the Friday letters, watching the little videos, coming through for material pickup, accessing Schoology, connecting with us during phase one. We know it's a lot, and it's a lot of new things that we're asking our families and students to participate in this unique beginning to a school year, but we just really appreciate all the effort that our families and students have put in as well. And then finally, in the superintendent's report, just two things as updates for me. I just want to follow up on public comments that were from August 24th. And so there was a public comment, a request to reconsider boys soccer still playing in the fall. But the update now, and it went out today to families in our high schools and soccer families and students, there is a spring schedule that's been put together. And I want to thank Justin Marion for his leadership with the Woodland and schools from other conferences. So there is a schedule. And so soccer, there is a plan to play soccer in the spring, as well as football. And so that's really encouraging for us that there are a number of schools that decided to do what we did, is move to the spring schedule, and they've worked together to put together an experience we think our student athletes will appreciate in the spring. And then there was a comment about the idea that it's shown up in media around families creating teaching pods. So again, little mini cohorts of kids that might work together in people's homes. And the idea was that, we could send teachers to the homes, and that having kids stay in cohorts is safer. But we can't participate in something like that, or just from the liability standpoint, we can't take responsibility for arranging that and sending teachers into people's homes. But privately, parents can, and I think that's what we're seeing in media reports of kind of organizing this way of having kids participate in virtual learning. And so we certainly would be supportive of that. And we know parents are doing that to support one another during this time. And so with that, that was a lot of talking, but that concludes the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Dr. Lexman. I'll move on to item 9 this evening, the board president's report, taking a look at the board calendar. So tonight, September 14th, we had our public budget hearing and a regular Board of Education meeting. Next Monday, September 21st, starting at 6 o'clock, we have a workshop from Employee Engagement and Culture, and that is on Title IX. It begins at 6. On Monday, September 28th, beginning at 6 p.m., we have a regular Board of Education meeting. And Monday, October 12th, starting at 6 p.m., a regular Board of Education meeting as well. Any board members have any community updates or any events to share? All right, we'll then move on to our consent agenda for the evening. There are 3 items. Item 10.1, the approval of the minutes from the August 24th meeting. Item 10.2, the employment summary, and item 10.3, the supplementary contract. Does anybody need anything separated? If not, we would look for a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any additional comments or questions? Not all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, that passes. All right, that concludes our meeting for this evening. So we would look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, thank you, everybody. Stay safe, take care of yourself, take care of each other.